Jonathan reads his thesis, episode 3. 3. Debate surrounding crowdfunding at universities. 3.1 Review methods. Since 1st December 2014, when I began work on this PhD, I've added over 2,900 items to my Zotero bibliographic software. The overwhelming majority of those items are related to this thesis. Just over 40%, 42%, are journal articles, which is probably to be expected. Books, 8%, and book chapters, 8%, make up the next most significant portion. Blog posts, 12%, and web pages, 6%, provide rich primary sources regarding research crowdfunding. 60 of the web pages are crowdfunding campaigns. Figure 3.1 shows the 10 most common items collected during this research. Figure 3.1, 10 most common bibliographic items collected during this research. So this is a pie diagram that shows 45% of journal articles, 30% of blog posts, 7% of web pages, 8% of books, 8% of book sections, so book chapters, 6% are reports, 6% are conference papers, 3% of magazine articles, 2% are theses, and 2% are newspaper articles. Almost all of this academic literature was discovered using Google Scholar. Google Scholar provides comprehensive coverage for humanities and social science disciplines, including business. Harzing and Elkengas, 2016. Searches were conducted using keyword searches and by reviewing the publications of interesting academics through their Google Scholar profiles or via author name searches. The references listed in interesting articles were reviewed to find useful past literature, looking backward from the article of interest, and by reviewing what articles had cited the article of interest, using Google Scholar cited by feature to look forward from when the article had been published. Some authors of interest were identified by their outreach on social media and through broadcast media such as The Conversation. In some cases, the back catalogue of interesting journals and conference proceedings were reviewed for items of interest. A small number of articles and authors of interest were suggested by colleagues. Access to the material was provided by RMIT University, where I was enrolled as a student after the 1st of April 2019. I also had staff access to the University of Melbourne Library. This occasionally proved useful as the coverage of the two libraries differs slightly. In addition, some older material that was not available from either library was available via the Internet Archive. For example, books by Robert Merton and Bernard Barber from the 1940s and 1950s on the sociology of research were available for short-term renewable loan via the Internet Archive, which I found very useful. Non-academic material was discovered using a combination of Google search and DuckDuckGo search via keyword searches. Hajian, Hossein al-Abadi, and Shemesh Shubara, 2022. Material related to research crowdfunding campaigns was discovered using the methods detailed in Chapter 4. This included the campaigns themselves, as well as blog posts and other media surrounding the campaigns. 3.2, Research crowdfunding literature. 3.2.1, Definitions of crowdfunding. Crowdfunding provides a method for people and organizations to mobilize their networks, usually via the internet, to raise funds for equity, goods and services, loans, or public benefit projects. Balaflam, Lambert, and Schweinbacher, 2014, Cumming, Leboeuf, and Schweinbacher, 2015. All or nothing crowdfunding campaigns must reach their nominated funding target within a fixed time span, usually 6 to 8 weeks, to receive any funding at all. Keep It All campaigns can keep all the funds they raise and are not restricted by a fixed time span. Cumming, Leboeuf, and Schweinbacher, 2015. Crowdfunding is often described in economic terms as a one-to-many exchange between those seeking capital and those providing capital, with the crowdfunding platform or, excuse me, as an intermediary for financial, regulatory and cultural services. Moritz and Block 2016, Swords 2018. Crowdfunding undertaken by researchers introduces the university as an additional intermediary, which complicates this equation. Crowdfunding differs from other forms of capital investment in that it is limited involvement with traditional financial intermediaries such as banks and other lending agencies. Ingram, Vast, and Tieglund, 2016. Oh, I need lunch. This provides participants with additional benefits beyond the funding. They gain feedback and suggestions as well as monetary contributions. Baptiste et al. 2018. They can connect with others and learn from them. Gerber and Hui, 2013. Karima Bues, Isabelle Mack, and Jerome Merrick provide an excellent analysis of contradictions and ambiguities of the contradictions and the ambiguities of the contradictions and the ambiguities inherent in the term crowdfunding. Bues, Mark, and Merrick, 2016. Crowdfunding is often divided. It's Merrick, not Merrick. Yes, I can. Crowdfunding is often divided into 4 types of funding: donations, loans, rewards, and equity. Moloch, 2014. Research crowdfunding is a specialized form of crowdfunding undertaken by academics at universities. Research crowdfunding campaigns can predominantly be cast as pure donation or reward donation. Paschen, 2017, which brings them into the domain of fundraising for philanthropy and public goods. Ching and Mohammed, 2010. As the great majority of universities in Australia are civic organisations, crowdfunding associated with universities can be classed as public sector crowdfunding. It took me forever to get through this. Public sector crowdfunding provides an example of process and governance innovations for engaging civil actors to address social problems. Hong and Ryu, 2019. Non-profit organisations, such as Australian universities, have a higher probability of receiving crowdfunding when compared to for-profit organisations. Bellaflamme, Lambert and Schweinbacher, 2013b. To summarise, research crowdfunding is crowdfunding that is based within or associated with universities. In Australia, it sits within the larger category of public sector crowdfunding. It provides examples of donation or reward crowdfunding. Donation crowdfunding at Australian universities will generally attract tax deductions, and have a higher probability of receiving contributions than for-profit organisations. 3.2.2, commentary about research crowdfunding. Before I review the evidence and frameworks that underlie this thesis, I'd like to give you a sense of the debate at the time that I began the project. Research crowdfunding was relatively new when Elizabeth Gerber and Julia Hui and Paul Bellaflamme, Thomas Lambert, and Armin Schweinbacher were refining their definitions. The idea of crowdfunding in universities attracted its fair share of commentary, both for and against this new practice. Understanding this commentary will help you understand where I began this journey and my subsequent research. Though still in their relatively early stages, crowdfunding platforms are becoming a popular mechanism for scientists to raise cash quickly. Ingeno, 2013. Funding research by appealing to the public is not a good trend. It doesn't solve any systemic problem, much like dropping some euros into a hat doesn't get homeless people off the street. Hossenfelder, 2011. In 2012 and 2013, Nature published 2 commentary pieces in favour of crowdfunding. Giles, 2012, K. Kaplan, 2013. The 2012 piece raised two concerns: lack of peer review and panda science, a fear that only marketable projects would be funded. It then provided arguments against both concerns. The 2013 piece mentioned the amount of work involved, the small amount of funding available to most researchers, the possibility of idea theft, and the danger of misrepresentation. Despite this, the overall tone is positive and encouraging. Similar commentary pieces have been published by University of California Television, 2012, Elsevier, Larkin 2013, Inside Higher Ed, Ingeno 2013, University Affairs, McDonald 2013, Thon 2013, C 2013, B 2013A, and The Conversation, Walsh 2014, Sitch 2015. Almost without exception, they begin with a personal anecdote of someone who has succeeded in crowdfunding where other sources of funding have failed. They often describe the highly competitive nature of research funding and reduced government funding for research. They then went on to explain in general terms how crowdfunding worked and provide advice to academics and provided advice on how academics could maximize their chances of being successful. They often closed with one or two issues related to crowdfunding, such as lack of peer review, only to either minimize that concern or provide an argument why it was invalid. Some commentary was entirely positive. PLOS Biology ran a commentary piece written by the founders of Dodo Funding, a biotechnology crowdfunding startup. Vechelard et al. 2016. In 2013, the crowdfunding platform Indiegogo interviewed a representative from a social bibliography platform, Mendeley, to advocate for crowdfunding for research, Indiegogo 2013. That is, these commentary pieces being published by Nature, Elsevier, and PLOS are almost identical in tone and content to conversations between organizations with commercial interests, such as crowdfunding service providers and research technology providers. These commentaries discuss the idea of research crowdfunding. In broad terms, they examined research crowdfunding from a policy as opposed to an empirical perspective. They were considered how it might fit with or disrupt the existing norms of research funding. While they presented research crowdfunding in a positive light, they also raised some possible issues. Issues raised included lack of credibility and peer review, Giles 2012, Ingeno 2013, Larkin 2013, Thon 2013b, panda science and lack of support for unpopular research, Giles 2012, Sitch 2015, excessive time commitment, Ingeno 2013, lack of clarity around institutional overheads, Ingeno 2013, Larkin 2013, intellectual property rights and theft of ideas, K. Kaplan 2013, Larkin 2013, legal risk of misrepresentation, K. Kaplan 2013, and fraud, Thon 2013b, and lack of support from promotion panels, McDonald 2013. Several articles suggested that greater involvement by government funding agencies would solve most or all of these problems. Thon 2013c, Sitch 2015. Despite raising these issues, these articles generally ended on an upbeat, positive note. Some others were not so encouraging. They concentrated almost completely on the perceived risks of crowdfunding. Sabine Hossenfelder was concerned that the public would only fund research with immediate results, leaving basic research unfunded. She was also concerned about panda science and about the lack of peer review, or to be more precise, the lack of an informed public. She was concerned that all researchers would eventually be expected to crowdfund their research. While she believed that crowdfunding might be useful for smaller, underfunded projects, it should not be used to fund research from scratch. Hossenfelder, 2011. Terry McGlynn felt that research crowdfunding would reinforce existing social biases. He felt it was unfair that crowdfunding success was directly related to social media presence, since social networks are personal networks, and researchers from low-income backgrounds do not generally have access to wealthy social networks. McGlynn, 2015. Melanie Fullick wrote one of the most comprehensive criticisms of research crowdfunding. She was concerned that crowdfunding was a form of marketisation with no peer review. As a result of this, she worried that researchers with the best marketing teams would get funded over more worthy researchers, and that public donations would not support basic research. She was also concerned that governments would see crowdfunding as an excuse to cut funding to research, while the public would experience donor fatigue and not donate to fund research. Fullick, 2014. In 2014, before I began this project, I wrote a blog post responding to Fullick's criticisms. It provided my own views as someone who believed that crowdfunding could be a useful new source of funding for researchers. O'Donnell, 2014. I was excited about research crowdfunding for exactly the same reason that it was attracting all these articles. It was new. Government research funding in Australia was established between the 1940s to 1960s. Benner, Grant and O'Kane, 2022. Since then, major changes have included the rise of entrepreneurial funding, exemplified by biotechnology startups, the emergence of open research, and the development of crowdfunding. Pomerantz and Peake, 2016, Walensky, 2005, Wolfsey, 1986. All of these have attracted controversy. My research seeks to examine some of the boosterish claims and trenchant criticisms and understand what role crowdfunding might actually play in Australian research funding. Research crowdfunding was contested in 2014 when I wrote my response to Melanie, and it remains so today. In 2018, I was told that an Australian university faculty was pursuing crowdfunding for engagement rather than research, because the Dean of Research didn't want staff to be undertaking crowdfunding campaigns for research funds. In 2021, there was at least one university in Australia that had effectively banned crowdfunding. 3.2.3, personal case studies. These policy commentaries are radically different to the picture presented by people who actually tried to raise funds for their research via crowdfunding. Most of these first-hand accounts have been written, often as blog posts, by academics who have been successful in their crowdfunding endeavours. They are, in general, much more guarded in their enthusiasm for crowdfunding. While the commentaries talk about the crowd in an abstract way, these first-person accounts talk of donors as friends and family. Talk of donors as family and friends. Ethan Pearlstein, an American scientist, was part of a team that raised US $25,460 for a pharmaceutical research project called Crowd for Discovery. Pearlstein calculated that 60% of all donors are in my social networks, namely Facebook and Twitter, while the remaining 40% are more than 1 degree removed. In other words, strangers. Pearlstein, 2013b, page 2. Rebecca English raised Australian $2,000 from 23 supporters to research home education in Australia. She was surprised that 75% of the funds came from her family, 60%, and friends, 15%, with only 20% coming from her expected donor base, the home education community, with 5% unidentified. English, 2014. In a highly innovative approach, Emmy Koivisto launched, ran, and analysed a crowdfunding campaign tracing finds in support of a Finnish archaeological project. She raised euro $1,320. 1,320 euros. Which funded the radiocarbon dating of 2 samples from the dig. She wrote her master's thesis to serve as a handbook for anyone wanting to organise a similar crowdfunding campaign in Finland. Koivisto, 2014, page 5. She surveyed the 44 donors with a 75% N equals 33 response rate. In contrast to Rebecca English and others, she found that 50% were connected to the research team and 50% had no connection. All respondents, N equals 32, reported that they would consider funding another research crowdfunding campaign. While this may not translate into future action, it does indicate a high level of satisfaction with the Tracing Fines campaign. When considering crowdfunding as a research funding model, she wrote, "It is important to recognise that crowdfunding cannot be the sole method to fund research in Finland. Examples have shown that the overall costs for excavations alone are much higher than what could be crowdfunded." Koivisto, 2014, page 60. The team decided to provide all written communications and rewards, e.g. blog posts, daily updates, final reports, in Finnish, as translating materials into English would have increased the workload related to the crowdfunding campaign. Crowdfunding is a cultural process, and language choices are an important indicator of how culture shapes crowdfunding. Koivisto, 2014. Others emphasised the workload involved, especially when comparing the funds raised to a government research grant. After raising US $10,733 from 185 donors to establish a climate and ecological history of the Falkland Islands, Jacqueline Gill opened her analysis by saying, "Crowdfunding is hard. Asking for money is hard. Asking people you know, even just a little on the internet, is really hard. Asking them again and again and again for an entire month, that's really, really, really hard." Gill, 2014, paragraph 2. Lenny Tettleman raised US $54,600 from 506 donors for a life science protocol repository. After the campaign was over, he wrote, "Many have reached out to me since March to see if crowdfunding is a good way to validate an idea or raise funds to launch a new startup. In all such cases, my answer is an unambiguous no." Tettleman, 2014, paragraph 2. Tettleman later wrote that of the US 54,000 that we raised, US 28,000 came from just 4 relatives. Tettleman, 2015, paragraph 1. Appreciation was another strong theme. In 2015, Carly Monks wrote, "A total of 73 people backed our campaign. I'm immensely grateful to each and every person who donated, shared, and supported us." Monks, 2015, paragraph 2. Even academics who had been unsuccessful thought that the exercise was worthwhile. Christopher Moore, who was unsuccessful in raising funds for computer game research, said, "The campaign has enabled me to create new networks, contacts, and opportunities, such as panel at the Human Rights Commission in Sydney next week, where I'll be talking about games and human rights." Moore, 2013, paragraph 6. Reflecting on his 2013 campaign, Paul Gardner-Stephen and his colleague said that they had been only somewhat successful, raising approximately US $13,500 of a US $300,000 keep it all goal, plus the attendant increase in publicity, which has its own value. Gardner-Stephen et al., 2017, paragraph 24. In 2016-2017, I provided advice to Alexia Maddox on her crowdfunding project, which was unsuccessful in raising funds. Afterwards, Alexia wrote that the campaign succeeded in its other goal of establishing a core network of people who were invested in the project and whom I can engage throughout the research practice and conduct. Maddox, 2017, paragraph 27. Whom I can engage throughout the research practice and conduct. Whatever, that's what she wrote. In a series of blog posts published as she was raising funds, Mel Thompson gave a clear image of the work involved in research crowdfunding. She wrote about moving from one campaign to another and how you forget the pain, the work involved in creating videos, logos, and sourcing appropriate rewards, the self-doubt that creeps in before you put your project live, her hopes that colleagues that she had assisted in the past would support her now, her role in evangelizing research crowdfunding, the mental fortitude required during the valley of death period when no one is contributing, speculations about the effect of government budget pronouncements, her work in communicating with the public, and her final reflections on crowdfunding as stakeholder engagement. M. Thompson, 2014F, 2014B, 2014J, 2014C, 2014E, 2014D, 2014G, 2014I, 2014A, 2014H. Fei Wei Li and Kathleen Pryor were raising funds for genomic research when a genome sequencing company offered to do all their sequencing for free. They considered cancelling their campaign, but opted instead to continue to raise funds for the next stage of the research. They were aiming to raise $15,000 to cover the cost of the sequencing and had raised US, no gap, $7,160 from 123 donors. It appears that the crowdfunding platform added the value of the sponsorship, $15,000, to the total raised. Actually, let's make that US 15,000 to the total raised US 7,160 to give a final figure of US 22,160. Pryor et al. 2014, Lee and Pryor 2014. Deborah Riley Huff, Kevin Herrera, Susan Ivey, and Tina Harry described their campaign to raise US, I think. Let's make a note. Deborah Riley Huff, Kevin Herrera, Susan Ivey, and Tina Harry described their campaign to raise $20,000 for equipment within their university library. As administrators, their account differs from academic accounts, as they describe a task force conducting the campaign in phases. The work is the same, but the tenor of the description differs in how they organise the work. Riley Huff et al. 2016. These first-person accounts provide a very different understanding of how research crowdfunding is conceived and executed. They discuss a range of issues that were related to the individual experience. One common thread amongst all the accounts, both commentary and personal accounts, was the idea that crowdfunding was driven by a lack of other potential resources. As Alexia Maddox said when she described her research crowdfunding campaign, precariousness drives innovation. Maddox, 2017, paragraph 1. We also have some personal accounts from an administrator who has supported crowdfunding in an Australian university. Campbell Thompson developed the crowdsourcing and crowdfunding program at the University of Western Australia. He provided a rare insight into the organisational drivers behind a crowdfunding program. In an industry presentation, he pointed out the importance of both institutional readiness and researcher readiness for success. The university's crowdfunding program complemented a crowdsourcing program that allowed people to volunteer to participate in research projects and a program that solicited research ideas from the public. He discussed whether crowdfunding was a good use of academics' time, considering the relatively small amounts involved. He advised that projects should fail fast. If they failed to attract attention early on, then the campaign should be closed down. Campbell Thompson, 2016. 3.2.4, multi-project reviews. Reviews of multiple projects take a different approach. They are, in general, trying to analyse common factors to provide advice that will help future research crowdfunders. Deb Verhoeven and Stuart Palmer have provided an analysis of multiple crowdfunding projects undertaken by Deakin University in Australia. They provided a report and analysis of their first 8 campaigns, Verhoeven and Palmer 2015, Verhoeven et al. Undated, and then subsequent analysis of 19 campaigns, Palmer and Verhoeven, 2016. They emphasise the value of research crowdfunding campaigns to develop the research communication and entrepreneurial skills of the participants, as well as providing their research with a visible presence in the community. They also touch on some of the organisational difficulties encountered when introducing a new funding model to a university, Verhoeven et al., undated. They describe the need for researchers to move their mindset from grant funding, with large funding requests written for specialised audiences that have lengthy decision-making processes and relatively low success rates, to a flipped funding model that emphasises shorter timeframes, social media skills, plain language, minimal funding targets, the offering of incentives to encourage donations, and treating crowdfunding as a first step in attracting investment. Verhoeven and Palmer, 2016, page 6. Their contribution to knowledge concentrates on the collection and visualization of social media, Twitter data relating to the research crowdfunding projects, Palmer and Verhoeven, 2016, 291. Their analysis of the density and width of Twitter networks associated with 8 research crowdfunding campaigns showed that research campaigns succeed more often when they move beyond tweets by researchers to others tweeting about their campaigns. That is, not by sending lots of tweets per se, but by extending the sequence of retweets and other rebroadcasts about their project to new, unique potential pledges. Palmer and Verhoeven, 2016, page 297. They identified 3 groups of success factors for successful research crowdfunding campaigns. Factors relating to the reach of the campaign's social media network. They analysed Twitter data and found that the diameter of the Twitter network, the average directed path length of the Twitter network, the average undirected path length of the Twitter network, and the average Twitter network ERDOS number for project principal were all important factors. Factors relating to the ability of the campaign to attract visits to its web page and then get the web page shared, the number of social media shares, the total page view count, and the total unique page view count of the project website. Factors relating to the ability of the campaign to raise funds, the average pledge amount. Verhoeven and Palmer, 2015, page 141. Some of the best analysis outside of Australia came from the 4 rounds of the SciFund Challenge. SciFund Challenge, or hashtag SciFund Challenge, was a crowdfunding initiative that ran 4 rounds of research crowdfunding, with 182 projects raising US $307,825 from 2011 to 2014. Burns 2012, Fawkes 2014, Wheat et al. 2013, Fawkes 2012. The organisers published analysis from the first 3 rounds of fundraising, which showed that researchers need to engage a broad audience, preferably before the crowdfunding campaigns have begun, to have a chance of meeting their funding target. They showed that considerable effort is required to encourage that audience to donate, figure 3.2. Even when participants felt that their efforts were not having any effect, the statistical analysis showed that continuous effort resulted in increased funding, Burns et al. 2014b. So, figure 3.2, how online engagement leads to a crowdfunding research project, Burns et al. 2014a. So this is a diagram that shows email and contacts, 1.7 project views per email. Press contacts, 92 views per press contact. Twitter presence, 1 project view per tweet per 70 followers, resulted in SciFund Challenge project views, 1 contributor per 100 views. And that, combined with friends and family, 1 contributor per 50 Facebook friends, resulted in contributors, about $50 contribution per contributor, which resulted in funding for research. Based on their data, they concluded that crowdfunding would not replace traditional funding sources. It did, however, provide a tangible reward for public outreach. It provided a pool of funds for high-risk or pilot research, which may not have access to other funding. It may provide an ongoing source of funding for laboratories that are deeply engaged with their community. It also provided clear evidence that crowdfunding could fund projects other than populist or panda-bear science. Many successful SciFund Challenge projects were on topics that are not normally considered popular with the public, e.g. statistics, little-known invertebrates, etc. This is not to say that all projects will have equal appeal, but the persistent engagement can build an audience for many kinds of projects. Burns et al., 2014b, page 22. Subsequent to the fourth round, they presented additional data that indicated that experienced mentoring and training can help a greater proportion of projects to succeed. They found indications that the average amount remained relatively constant, and these results held across differing crowdfunding platforms. Fawkes, 2014. This echoes their earlier advice that the key factor in the fundraising success of a project is not the particular site, but the crowd that the project initiator brings to that site. Wheat et al., 2013, page 71. Ethan Perlstein, himself a successful crowdfunder, Perlstein, 2013a, analysed 115 successfully crowdfunded science projects from 4 different crowdfunding platforms: Kickstarter, Indiegogo, MicroRaiser, and Rocket Hub, mainly from the SciFund Challenge. Hashtag SciFund Challenge. As well as university researchers, he identified citizen scientists, student-led teams, pedagogical research, and research advocacy as crowdfunded projects that may have struggled to attract conventional research funding. Research crowdfunding campaigns attracted $60 to $100 per donor, which matched non-research campaigns on those platforms. The projects on the specialized research platforms MicroRaiser and Rocket Hub had very similar statistical profiles, even though MicroRaiser campaigns operated on an all-or-nothing basis, while the Rocket Hub campaigns were keep it all. His data indicated that there was a quantifiable difference between the upper limit that was raised on research crowdfunding projects on MicroRaiser and Rocket Hub and projects on less specialized platforms, Kickstarter and Indiegogo. There is a ceiling between $25,000 and $35,000, above which MicroRaiser and Rocket Hub science projects don't go, but above which Kickstarter and Indiegogo projects do boldly go. Perlstein, 2013b, paragraph 8. He believed that rewards on Kickstarter and Indiegogo allowed these projects to aim for larger targets, while grant dependence, academic conservatism, and ideological resistance limited the aspirations of those researchers on MicroRaiser and Rocket Hub. Perlstein, 2013b. These researchers have examined research crowdfunding in isolation from other funding. Julie Hugh and Elizabeth Gerber, by contrast, had undertaken extensive grounded theory research into crowdfunding in general before looking at research crowdfunding. They explored the attitudes and experience of academics, crowdfunders, through the analysis of 27 interviews with research crowdfunders in the United States. They found that academics recognized the new affordances in research funding that crowdfunding could provide, but they needed to modify their approach to be able to build an audience for their work. Drawing on self-determination theory, they grouped these affordances as competence, relatedness, and autonomy. Public engagement allowed research crowdfunders to feel a renewed sense of competence, while they recognized that they needed to improve their research communication skills. The small number of research crowdfunders created a sense of relatedness between those who were crowdfunding. It also limited access to mentors and role models. Research crowdfunders felt an increased sense of autonomy through raising their own funds, even though they underestimated the work involved. Hugh and Gerber, 2015. Henry Sauerman Chiara Franzoni and Coris Shafi, 2019, examined over 700 campaigns on Experiment.com, a crowdfunding platform for researchers. They demonstrated that students and postdoctoral fellows were more successful than senior scientists, and women had higher success rates than men. In 2020, Rebecca Parrick and Brendan Chapman published a review. Is that a repeat? In 2020, Rebecca Parrick and Brendan Chapman published a review of the literature related to donor motivation for research crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. They found that the higher success rates of junior researchers was a specific characteristic of research crowdfunding. By contrast, business and cultural campaigns were more successful when the project creators were more experienced. This was not the case for research crowdfunding. They did not find enough articles to warrant drawing firm conclusions. Parrick and Chapman, 2020. In 2021, Johnson, Chun-Sing Cheng, and Justin Rogers reviewed 152 social science research crowdfunding campaigns on Experiment.com. Most projects raised around US $3,000 to US $3,500. They identified the use of video and setting realistic funding goals as success factors. Having a scientific endorsement and involvement of human subjects did not significantly influence the amount raised. They saw research crowdfunding as a system which had fewer barriers to entry, higher success rate, better communication with donors, higher transparency, and relatively short turnaround times. They also saw it as a space to support groundbreaking ideas. They were concerned about the small amounts raised, primarily from friends and family. They identified ethical challenges. The ethics of the platform were not always apparent. There is no standardized identification of those projects that had gained or would be required to gain formal ethics clearance. And that crowdfunding could reinforce the ability for wealthy, educated people to shape what research gets funded. Cheng and Rogers, 2021. 3.2.5, health research crowdfunding. There have been several studies that specifically looked at medical research crowdfunding campaigns. In 2014, Nick Dragilovic and Larry Lind reviewed 125 crowdfunding campaigns for oncology research and 5 campaigns for ultra-rare diseases. Their results indicated that crowdfunding would be useful for early-stage research. However, the time required for planning and execution of a social media campaign would compete with other obligations, so that crowdfunding may not be perceived as worth the effort. Dragilovic and Lind, 2014. In 2015, Habinav Sharma, James Kahn, and Philip P.J. Devereaux reviewed 20 campaigns for clinical randomized controlled trials and confirmed that the small amounts raised by most campaigns could be useful for early-stage research. Sharma, Kahn, and Devereaux, 2015. In 2021, Siska Verbandard, Ilse Roman, and Isabel Huys confirmed these findings through interviews with 16 European stakeholders with expertise in clinical research, funding mechanisms, and or drug repurposing. Verbandard, Roman, and Huys, 2021. Dragilovic and Lind also surveyed potential donors and found that they were most likely to support research into common or pediatric diseases and preferred to contribute to campaigns run by not-for-profit organizations. Dragilovic and Lind, 2016. In 2019, Anna Alexina Stanislaw Akilenka and Agnes Lubloy responded to these studies. They published an analysis of 81 medical research campaigns from Experiment.com and 28 from Consano.com, another platform for research crowdfunding. They found they found that a wide range of diseases could attract funding, and that crowdfunding could provide funds for diseases that may not attract other research funding. The intentions of donors, as identified by Dragilovic and Lind, did not correspond to the actual donor activity, as surveyed by Alexina Akulinka and Lubloy. Alexina Akulinka and Lubloy, 2019. In 2021, Safuan Benazuz, John Malkinson, and Gregory Toh published a review of 34 campaigns across 18 crowdfunding platforms that raise funds for research into neglected tropical diseases. They identified several success factors, including scientific peer review of the campaign, use of video, university affiliation of fund seeker, and use of reward-based crowdfunding models. Benazou, Melikson, and Toth, 2021. Others have reviewed research crowdfunding campaigns as part of other reviews. For example, Eduardo Gallo Canjano, Carla Archibald, Rachel Friedman, Rochelle Stephen, Richard A. Fuller, Edward T. Game, Tiffany Morrison, and Ewan Ritchie reviewed crowdfunding campaigns related to conservation, finding that 40%, n equals 231, could be classified as campaigns for research funds, of which 171 were based at universities around the world. Most research projects focused on ecology and threats, whereas most persuasion projects targeted raising awareness. Closing bracket. Closing bracket. Gallo Cajano et al., page 1432. I'll fill in the details later. Half of all projects focused on single species, mostly threatened birds and animals, as opposed to other threatened classes. Given the earlier debates around panda science, it is interesting that they identified crowdfunding as a potential source of support for Cinderella species, those that are aesthetically appealing but currently overlooked species. Robert J. Smith, Diogo Veracimo, Nicholas J.B. Isaac, Kate E. Jones, page 206. Again, I'll put the year in later. This approach is important because it shows the potential for crowdfunding to fund persuasion projects, on-the-ground projects, capacity building projects, and other projects that complement and implement research findings. 3.2.6, International Research. Bibliographic analysis indicates that the overwhelming majority of crowdfunding research comes from the United States of America. Gil Gomez et al., 2021. However, crowdfunding is cultural. It is bounded by language, by distance, and by the legislative regime in which it sits. That means that national reviews of crowdfunding are particularly valuable. Country-specific case studies can provide insights into differing cultural and jurisdictional frameworks and provide different perspectives. Lennart Gensinik, 2021. Not all researchers are aware of crowdfunding as a source of research funds. In Nigeria, most academics were not aware of crowdfunding as a novel model for enterprise funding. For those that were aware, it had a significant positive relationship with entrepreneurial intentions. Ekpe et al., 2017. Similarly, Erfurger and Berzer Özdegun, 2021, found that entrepreneurial academics in Turkey are more likely to undertake research crowdfunding campaigns. Their intentions would be strongly influenced by performance expectations, the subjective norms of their discipline, and the benefit to their image as a researcher. That is important because employment, promotion, and recognition are strong motivating factors for academics beyond their intrinsic love of their research topic. A European Union review echoed this finding when it recommended that a comprehensive training program be developed to inform universities of the possibilities of alternate financing for research, including crowdfunding. Jakiminowicz et al. 2017. In 2018, Uko Iketai, Ewan McKay, and Hiromi Yokoyama surveyed 950 members of the public and 30 Japanese academics who had conducted crowdfunding campaigns. They found that while the public thought that peer review of crowdfunding was important, the great majority of their academic respondents did not think that peer review was desirable before academics could launch crowdfunding campaigns. Japanese crowdfunders felt a strong responsibility to their donors for the execution of their research projects. Iketai, McKay, and Yokoyama, 2018. In Italy, Natalie Colasanti, Rocco Frondizi, and Marco Meneguzzo, 2018, established that university communities can provide meaningful support for crowdfunding campaigns. They saw their university as a community and examined how civic crowdfunding could assist university endeavours. In Germany, Valerie Deldup, Oliver Kral, and Robin Berger, 2020, worked with technology transfer offices, academics, and crowdfunding platforms to devise potential solutions to issues, particularly regulatory issues, related to crowdfunding for public research organisations in Germany. They identified public communication and emotional engagement as advantages of research crowdfunding and cooperative crowdfunding models involving public research organisations and universities as being particularly powerful in this space. Malaysia provides an interesting case study of how law and culture shape crowdfunding within universities. Since 2016, a number of papers have emerged that have examined the potential of crowdfunding in Malaysian universities. They have raised concerns about fraud by those raising funds and theft of research ideas by third parties. Liu and Chu, 2016. Liu et al. 2018. They've identified crowdfunding as a potential new revenue source for Malaysian universities. Wilden Zulfikar et al. 2018. And as a source of both funding and practical education for emerging entrepreneurs. Salwani et al. 2018. In 2021, Suhaili Amun et al. Reviewed crowdfunding as one potential response to a 20% reduction in government funding for universities. They could only identify one university in Malaysia using crowdfunding, although several had the capacity for donations, endowments, gifts, or waqf, Islamic charitable endowment. Al-Mu'amun et al. 2021. In 2022, Abdul Siti Salwani et al. Updated their work on Malaysian university initiatives to incorporate crowdfunding into entrepreneurial education. They framed it within the requirements to conform with government policy that incorporates Islamic law. Salwani et al. 2022. These papers are seeking to identify features of crowdfunding that will work within the social, legal, and religious culture of Malaysia. 3.2.7. University crowdfunding is civic crowdfunding. Civic crowdfunding describes the financing of projects dedicated to a civic purpose, initiated by civic initiatives and supported by individuals and organisations with civic intentions, and often intermediated on online platforms which dedicate themselves to civic purposes and stakeholders. The term civic itself can refer to the actions of and within cities or municipalities, but also to the actions of citizens towards a common goal. Winslow, 2020. As the great majority of universities in Australia are public universities, crowdfunding undertaken through those universities constitutes civic crowdfunding. Crowdfunding provides several advantages to universities. In 2013, Enrico Wick, Brett Schneider Ulrich, and Gian Marco Limista were experimenting with crowdfunding to support startups from universities. They sought to build a platform within their university that allowed academics to connect with investors. Wick, Brett Schneider, and Limista, 2013. Claire Ingram, Emmanuel Vast, and Robin Teagland, 2016, provided excellent insights into the complexity of running a crowdfunding platform within a university with their review of CrowdUni. They described how the university both facilitates and limits the crowdfunding activity. Universities are civic communities within themselves, and crowdfunding can be used to improve the university as an organization. Colasanti, Frondizi, and Meneguzzo, 2018, Thoth-Pajor et al., 2020. It provides a new method of catalyzing students and alumni as donors, particularly in less prestigious institutions. Chow et al., 2019, Horda, Mioli, and Vismara, 2022, and a new way for academics to support their colleagues with donations, Verhoeven and Palmer, 2015. It provides a way to forge partnerships across government bodies, businesses, and citizens. Striver et al., 2015. Elena Medeo, which should just be 2022. Come on, Medeo, suppress all of that. That's it. Elena Medeo, 2022, provides a useful review of the literature on crowdfunding in universities as it relates to civic crowdfunding. 3.2.8, large-scale analysis of crowdfunding. Beyond the literature on crowdfunding in universities, I relied on systematic and bibliometric literature reviews to provide a broad understanding of crowdfunding in general. I examined 16 reviews, Table 3.1, which examined literature from 2006 to 2021. The most expansive review was a bibliometric review by Gil Gomez et al., 2021, that examined over 500 publications. The most focused review was Kiri et al., 2022, which examined 9 publications related to crowdfunding for health research. So, Table 3.1, I examined 16 reviews, Table 3.1. Table 3.1, systematic and bibliometric reviews of crowdfunding literature ordered by years surveyed. Topic, authors and year of publication, start, end, and items. Crowdfunding. Topic, crowdfunding. Authors and year of publication, Moritz and Block, 2016. Start 2016. Start 2006. In 2014, items 127. Crowdfunding. Police, Mark and Merrick, 2016. Start 2011. In 2015, 29 items. Crowdfunding. Cartemo, 2017. 2011 to 2016, 51 items. Crowdfunding. Kupaswamy and Bayus, 2018. Start 2009. In 2017, 42 publications. Crowdfunding. Shinor and Vic, 2020. Start 2010. In 2017, 88 publications. Crowdfunding. Allegri and Molskis, 2021. From 2011 to 63 publications from 2011 to 2017. Crowdfunding, research funding. Wuzdin, Galazi, and Rezok, 2017. 32 publications between 2012 and 2017. Crowdfunding, health. Reswick and Mosilanos, 2017. No start date, up to 2017, 43 publications. Crowdfunding, Baptiste et al., 2018. No start date, up to 2017, 179 publications. Crowdfunding, Gil Gomez et al., 2021. 521 publications between 1978 and 2018. Crowdfunding Public Sector, Linhat Gansinic, 2021. 64 publications between 2006 and 2018. Crowdfunding, Abdullah et al., 2019. 487 publications between 2008 and 2018. Crowdfunding, Sustainability, Bockel, Horich and Tenner, 2021. 83 publications between 2011 and 2018. Crowdfunding, Health Research Funding, I see. Kopkiri et al., 2022, 9 publications between 2014 and 2019. Crowdfunding Education, Turulia and Capo in Press, 165 publications between 2014 and 2021. Crowdfunding Personalities, Newhus, Isaac and Bostadanzik, 2022, 28 publications between 2015 and 2021. In the earliest review, Alexandra Moritz and Jorn Bloch, 2016, examined the extant literature on crowdfunding for capital seekers, capital providers, and the intermediaries, and formulated research questions for each area of research. Karima Boas, Isabel Mark, and Jerome Merrick, 2016, provided a bibliographic analysis of the early literature and pointed out the need for more positive theory on how crowdfunding works, normative theory on what framings are more useful, and critical theory to guide further development. Valtteri Kartermo, 2017, sought to identify elements of successful crowdfunding campaigns. They found that most existing literature focused on campaign variables, then the attributes of the creator, the donor, and to a much lesser extent, the crowdfunding platform. Almost all studies focused on one of these aspects. There were very few holistic studies. Venet Kupaswamy and Barry Bayous, 2018, provided an analysis of empirical crowdfunding literature. They found that most research was at the project level and called for research into the project funding cycle, crowd behavior, impact of friends and family, and how crowdfunding fits with new product development. Rotem Chenor and Amy Ann Vick, 2020, found that most studies involved quantitative analysis of data scraped from awards-based platforms. They felt there was a need for broader conceptualization beyond financial success. They called for more research into success factors in equity lending and donation contexts. Ines Allegre and Melina Moleskis, 2021, examined crowd behavior, funding, success, and post-funding performance in donation and reward-based crowdfunding campaigns. As others had, they found that research had primarily used the project as the object of inquiry. They thought that future research on the role of the creator and the funder would be useful. Maud Ferdas Riskin, Masata Gilazi, Ghazali, and Shukr Abed Razak, 2017, reviewed general crowdfunding literature to understand how it could be applied in a university setting. Of the 32 crowdfunding references, 7 concerned crowdfunding in universities, while the rest were about crowdfunding in general, mostly reward-based crowdfunding. In 2017, Matthew Renwick and Elise Mossalos published a systematic review of literature related to all aspects of health crowdfunding. It discussed research crowdfunding alongside crowdfunding for health expenses, health initiatives, and commercial health innovation. They found that it increases the overall funds available for health research, can draw funds to under-supported research, and increase public engagement in research. They found concerns that projects may not be funded based on scientific merit, and that the crowd may not be able to identify high priority projects. Patient funding of research and participation in research raised ethical concerns. It was difficult for donors to ensure project accountability. The transaction fees charged by platforms made it a relatively inefficient funding mechanism. There was a possibility of fraud and money laundering. Renwick and Masalayos, 2017. Vincenzo Bettise, Chiara Franzoni, Cristina Rosi Lambastra, and Paola Rovelli, 2018, provided an expansive definition of crowdfunding and analysed factors related to crowdfunding success. They felt that more research was needed on the role of rewards, the post-funding outcomes, and the role of crowdfunding in innovative and high-risk projects. Regina Lennart Gensinsek, 2021, found that most research on crowdfunding in the public sector had taken place in the USA and the UK and had concentrated on the cultural sector. Overall, she found that crowdfunding can have a positive impact on public organisations as it contributes to increasing efficiency and productivity, as well as increasing the involvement of citizens in solving social problems. Ahmed Ridhawan Abdullah, Nahita Ramets, Sita Salwina Abdullah, Aziz Hassan, and Mohammed Nabi Ma'iyana, 2019, used bibliometric analysis to identify 4 clusters of publications: entrepreneurship, economic theories, marketing and consumer behaviour, and organisational management. Co-word analysis indicated that crowdfunding had developed into a separate field of study from crowdsourcing. Hermenegildo Gil Gomez, Raul Otros Paredes, Vicente Guerrero Navarro, and Pablo Zagara Saldana, 2021, undertook a bibliometric analysis that produced similar results to Abdullah et al. Alexa Bockel, Jacob Horich, and Isabel Tenner, 2021, examined the literature on crowdfunding for sustainability projects. They felt that more research was needed on the extent to which financial resources acquired by sustainable entrepreneurship via crowdfunding are used to create actual contributions to sustainable development. Eniyi Edith Kopokiri and 16 other authors, 2022, conducted a qualitative evidence synthesis of crowdfunding for health. They identified engagement strategies, success factors, and risk mitigation strategies. They concluded that campaigns with a broad engaged audience and efficient public engagement strategies alone can be successful in funding innovative research. Crowdfunding is useful for early stage research and can then be used as preliminary data for longer grants. Based on this analysis, they launched a pilot program to help researchers in low and middle income countries crowdfund for medical research. Let's move that to there. That the paragraph and make that normal. Not italicized. Okay. Julie Newhouse, Andrew Isaac, and Dinefa Bostanzik, 2022, examined research on personalities in relation to crowdfunding. They pointed out that some personality types, e.g. propensity for risk, may be beneficial to a certain extent and then become harmful if overexpressed. Overall, they found a strong positive relationship between openness and crowdfunding success. Narcissism could be beneficial or could be overexpressed to the detriment of the campaign. Liesla Turulia and Amra Kepo recently undertook a systematic literature review and bibliometric analysis of literature related to crowdfunding in education and provided a useful knowledge map of the domain. Turulia and Kepo in press. Figure 3.3, knowledge map of education crowdfunding from Turulia and Kepo in press. So up the top, we've got models, platforms, technology, DonorChoose.org, blockchain, fintech, etc. Purpose, education sector innovation, public university funding, etc. And projects, school, student projects, research activities, startups, etc. all come down through conceptualization into education crowdfunding. University characteristics and staff and student bodies lead into university participation, which feeds into education crowdfunding. Motivational factors and intention lead through to the crowdfunders, which lead into education crowdfunding. Out of that, off to one side is crowdfunding success, but it mostly leads through to outcome, which is empowering education and student performance. It's quite a nice map, really, like conceptual map. 3.3, the university research landscape. 3.3.1, the ethos of research. Rachel Katz undertook a philosophical critique of research crowdfunding that considered the ethics of crowdfunding. She positioned it within the norms of research. She was concerned about governance, accountability, trust, transparency, inclusion, and democratization. Katz 2020. Her work inspired my own use of research norms and modes of research. O'Donnell 2023. The norms of research have been discussed by sociologists of science since the Robert Merton 1942 paper, A Note on Science and Democracy. As part of a discussion on how research should not be used for nationalist purposes, Merton outlined 4 sets of institutional imperatives: universalism, communism, disinterestedness, organized skepticism, comprise the ethos of modern science. Merton, 1942, page 118. Universalism means that claims are tested against pre-established impersonal criteria. Communism means that discoveries are produced through social collaboration and are the property of the whole research community. Disinterestedness is enforced because the activities of scientists are subject to rigorous policing. Organized skepticism relates to the suspension of judgment and the detached scrutiny of beliefs. Merton, 1942, page 124. Bernard Barber expanded on these ideas by adding 2 more norms: faith in the moral virtue of rationality, so that concepts can be described in abstract and general fashion, and emotional neutrality as the condition for rationality. Barber, 1952. Merton expanded on these ideas in later writings, including in Social Theory and Social Structure and The Sociology of Science. Merton, 1968, 1973. In 1974, Anne Mitroff produced counters to these norms based on his work with senior scientists who were examining the moon rocks. He countered faith in the moral virtue of rationality with the moral virtue of rationality and non-rationality, which asserts that it is the interplay between both personal and impersonal forces that drives research. Emotional neutrality was countered by emotional commitment. Scientists should be emotionally committed to their ideas. Universalism was countered by particularism. Research will be judged in part on the social and psychological characteristics of the scientist. He countered communism with solitariness, which includes protective control over discoveries. Disinterested was countered by interestedness in their special communities of interest. Organized skepticism was countered by organized dogmatism. The scientist must believe in his own findings without a conviction while doubting those of others with all his worth. Mitroff, 1974, 592, page 592. I'm right, that should be on a t-shirt. These ideas have been challenged by researchers such as Michael Mulcahy, who argues that they are not so much norms as expressions of ideology. or K, 1976. Okay. Table 3.2, norms and counternorms, counterposed with the characteristics of Mode 2. Merton, 1942, Mitroff, 1974, Anderson et al., 2010, Nowotny, Scott and Gibbons, 2006, from O'Donnell, 2023. Mode 1. Let's put that in the center and that in the center. Okay, so Mode 1 and Mode 2. Underneath Mode 1, there are two columns, norms and counternorms. Under norms, you've got faith in the moral virtue of rationality. Counternorms, faith in the moral virtue of rationality and non-rationality. And in Mode 2, that is counterposed with problems are set in the context of the application. Mode 1 norms of universalism and counternorms of particularism are counterposed by transdisciplinarity in Mode 2. Mode 1 norms of communism and counternorms of solitariness are counterposed by many heterogeneous sites of knowledge production in Mode 2. Mode 1 norm of emotional neutrality and counternorm of emotional commitment is counterposed by socially accountable and highly reflexive in Mode 2. And the norm and counternorm of disinterestedness and interestedness is also counterposed by that Mode 2 area of socially accountable and being socially accountable and highly reflexive. Mode 1 norm of organized skepticism and counternorm of organized dogmatism is counterposed by Mode 2 through novel forms of quality control. Mode 1 norms of governance and administration are counterposed by problems set in the context of application in Mode 2. And Mode 1 norms of quality and quantity are counterposed by novel forms of quality control in Mode 2. In the 1990s, a group led by Michael Gibbons took a different approach. They argued that research had changed so much that these norms and counternorms no longer described all research. They dubbed the existing norms and counternorms were indicators of one mode of research, which they dubbed Mode 1. They believe that the existing norms and norms were indicators of one particular mode of research, of one particular mode of research, which they dubbed Mode 1. They described Mode 2, in contrast to Mode 1, as being much more fluid and situational. Research teams came together for specific purposes and broke apart at the end of a project. Knowledge was produced in many places, not just universities. It was transdisciplinary, socially accountable, and highly reflexive. Mode 2 research took into account many points of view rather than one neutral point of view. Mode 2 had multiple forms of quality control beyond peer review. Gibbons et al., 1994, Nowotny, 2006. John Zeman provided a critique of these ideas when he wrote about post-academic research, in the sense of research turning towards postmodernism. Zeman, 1996. I don't think he meant it as a flattering term. Others have continued to find the norm-counternorm structure to be useful. In 2010, Melissa Anderson, Emily Roning, Raymond DeVries, and Brian Martinson described two sets of norms and counternorms through their work with health researchers. Governance or independence countered administration or management, and quality of research countered quantity of outputs. Anderson et al., 2010. I found both the norm, counternorm, and Mode 1, Mode 2 distinctions to be useful in framing issues relating to research crowdfunding. 3.3.2, Areas of Concern for Universities. In addition to the large-scale reviews of crowdfunding literature, I examined 5 systematic reviews on topics that, while not being specifically about crowdfunding, related to the way that crowdfunding is conducted within universities. Table 3.3. These were topics such as entrepreneurship, fundraising, charitable giving, and research grants, which shape the landscape of research crowdfunding, and social media, which is the main way that people seek to raise funds. And research grants, which shape the landscape of research crowdfunding, as well as social media, which is a main way that people seek to raise funds through crowdfunding. These were topics such as entrepreneurship, fundraising, charitable giving, and research grants, which shape the landscape of research crowdfunding, as well as social media, which is the main way that people seek to raise funds through crowdfunding. So, Table 3.3, systematic reviews of topics related to crowdfunding in universities, ordered by years surveyed. Again, it's got split into topic, authors, and years of publication, start date, end date, and items. So, entrepreneurship in universities, Miller et al., 2018, 129 items between 1990 and 2015. Social media for innovation, Bamani, Mention, and Balitia, 2019, 119 items between 2009 and 2017. Research grants in universities, Hug and Eschbach, 2020, 12 items between 1990 and 2018. Fundraising in universities, Medeo, 2022, 160 items between 1993 and 2018. And charitable giving, Chapman, Hornsey, and Gillespie, 2021, 63 items between 2002 and 2018. Crystal Miller, Alan Alexander, James A. Cunningham, and Ekaterina Alberts, 2018, provided an excellent analysis of entrepreneurship literature related to universities from 1990 to 2015. They explored the changing role of entrepreneurial academics who engage with industry and academic entrepreneurs who commercialize research. This was a useful distinction, as academics who crowdfund can be classed as entrepreneurial academics, as they are seeking to engage rather than to gain a commercial return from their research. Engage with the public. Hardik Bilmani and Laure Mention and Perigine Barletia, 2019, viewed social media as an effective, real-time, low-cost channel to exchange information across organizational boundaries. They found that there was no uniform approach to the use of social media in innovation processes. They called for more research into social media use within organizations, as opposed to public social media, and social media platforms specifically designed to foster innovation. Sven E. Hug and Miriam Asselbach, 2020, provided an overview of peer review assessment criteria for grants. They synthesized the evaluation criteria used to assess grant applications as research quality, originality, academic and extra-academic relevance, quality, appropriateness, rigor, coherence or justification, plus quality of description, clarity, completeness, plus personal qualities, motivation, traits, and diversity, plus feasibility. Hug and Eschbach, 2020, page 10. Elena Medeo, 2022, undertook a topical literature review of fundraising at universities. They examined success factors, organizational factors, effectiveness, donor behavior, stakeholder engagement, online fundraising, including crowdfunding, financial stability, outcomes and regulation of fundraising. Cassandra Chapman, Matthew J. Hornsey, and Nicole Gillespie, 2021, found that trust in an organization or a sector are strongly related to charitable giving. However, it was unclear if trust preceded giving or giving built trust. Trust only explained about 5% of the variation in giving. They call for more studies based on behavioural analysis as opposed to self-reporting, more studies in non-Western settings, and more studies that question the relationship between trust and giving. 3.3.2 Research Funding for Australian Universities. This project provides an Australian case study on research administration within Australian universities. As such, it is useful to understand something of Australian university research funding. An excellent understanding of Australian universities in general can be gained from Hannah Forsyth's History of the Modern Australian University, particularly if it is contrasted with Glenn Davis's brief Australian Idea of a University, Forsyth 2014, Davis 2017. Mats Benner, Jonathan Grant, and Mary O'Kane also provided an excellent review of the history of Australian universities, up to and including early responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Benner, Grant, and O'Kane, 2022. I have provided a brief history of the development of research funding in the preface. This section provides more details on how funding works within universities. For funding purposes, research in Australian universities is defined as creative and systematic work undertaken in order to increase the stock of knowledge, including knowledge of humankind, culture, and society, and to devise new applications of available knowledge. Department of Education, Skills and Employment, 2022, page 7. This definition covers all research activities within the Australian sector. As most of the major art schools in Australia are attached to university, it includes creative work such as art, music, and creative writing when undertaken by university academics. It also includes activities associated with research, such as scholarly publication and research communication to the general public, also referred to as SciComm. It excludes activities related to teaching, except for research into educational theory and practice. This definition is used for the distribution of some funding to universities. As well as defining what research outputs are counted. Individual funding agencies, e.g. industry-related funding agencies, may define research differently and may favour different types of research outputs. Major figures responsible for shaping research funding in Australian universities have made useful and interesting public statements over the years, have had administrators with clear understanding of the processes involved. One of the characteristics of research funding policy in Australia has been the tension between curiosity-driven research, pure, pioneering, or theoretical research, and research with a planned outcome, applied, sustaining, or practical research. In 1985, Barry Jones, as Minister for Science and the Minister assisting the Minister for Industry, Technology and Commerce, wrote, Australian government support for R&D is broadly comparable with that of other medium-sized developed countries, but business support for R&D is amongst the lowest of all industrial countries. Related to this, the quality and quantity of Australian research is high, but its performance in applying this research in industry is dreadful. Jones, 1985, page 7. He wrote about the efforts that the government were developing to encourage more industry-academic collaboration. 8 years later, Peter Johnson, in his role as Assistant Registrar for Research Administration at the University of Western Australia, reported on Australian research grants in the primary industry and energy sector. He described how cultural differences between the universities and the industry research funders played out in contract negotiations over industry-funded grants. It is ironical, though, that primary industry and energy funding agencies argue that universities must be prepared to perform in a commercial environment when the agencies themselves are not willing to accept the commercial reality of funding projects at full cost levels. Johnson, 1993, page 19. In 1988, Don Aitken, chair of the newly established Australian Research Council, wrote outlining how the role of the new council and the need for priority-driven research. When the money dries up, you have to be a lot more selective, and priority setting, difficult though it is the way forward. Aitken, 1988, page 149. In 2009 and 2011, Karen Moe, a research manager at the University of Canberra, provided a clear understanding of how the peer review process worked for the Australian Research Council and the National Health and Medical Research Council. She found that members of expert advisory committees had different approaches to selecting grants, and the panels differed on their conception of excellence, the goal of grant selection. Moe, 2009, 2011. In 2017, Karen Moe worked with John Coventry, Danielle Herbert, Kathy Hill, Nicholas Graves, and Adrian Barnett to examine how Australian health scientists reviewed funding applications. They found that industry-focused researchers, in this case public health researchers, defined quality differently from basic science researchers. While public health researchers favoured qualities leading to translation and incremental development of ideas with practical application, basic science researchers sought qualities leading to breakthroughs and paradigm shifts. Coventry et al. 2017. This work was part of a long-running series of innovations and investigations designed to critique and understand grant development and review processes in Australia. The core group of Adrian Barnett, Danielle Herbert, Philip Clark, and Nicholas Graves have examined how scores are awarded, the time spent preparing applications, pressures on the system, conflict of interest, impact on stress and family relationships, and research productivity. They have tested interventions that include simplified peer review processes, randomized and lottery selection processes, and voting processes. They've been able to quantify the amount of time spent on unsuccessful applications and the effect that this work has on researchers and their families. They've tested several mechanisms that would reduce the burden on researchers and the funding bodies. Herbert et al. 2014, 2015, 2013, Barnett et al. 2014, 2015, Clark et al. 2016. With other researchers, they've examined video and multimedia modes of submission, as opposed to written applications, and the effectiveness of discussing career interruptions in grant applications. Duran et al. 2017, Duran, Lott and Duran 2014, Barnett et al. 2022. They provided an important understanding of how peer review in grant funding does and does not work in Australia. Their work suggests that other methods of review are possible and that other approaches may generate better funding outcomes, as well as improving the well-being of researchers who are applying for funding. Jennifer Chubb has worked with other researchers to understand the attitudes to and effects of the Australian and United Kingdom government's impact agenda for research funding. The Australian Research Council and UK counterparts had introduced impact statements as mandatory parts of their research funding applications. Jennifer Chubb and Richard Watermayer reported the hyperinflation of impact claims for the purpose of securing publicly funded research is unacceptable, not least where it jeopardizes and potentially despoils the interface between science and society. Chubb and Watermayer, 2016. Jennifer Chubb and Mark Reed examined UK and Australian academics' attitudes to the introduction of impact assessment exercises, which were designed to shape government funding for universities. They found that the political roots of impact politics in both the UK and Australia continue to fuel suspicion that this agenda is an extension of neoliberal attempts to marketise the academy, only valuing knowledge in narrow, instrumental terms as a return on public investment. Chubb and Reed, 2018. With Gemma Derrick, she described the gendered assumptions regarding research impact. Gendered expectations of excellence for non-academic impact has the potential to unconsciously dissuade women from pursuing more masculinized types of impact, act as a barrier to how female researchers mobilize their research evidence, as well as limit the recognition female researchers gain as excellent and therefore trustworthy sources of evidence. Chubb and Derrick, 2020. Uncertainty in research funding affects early career researchers more than their more established colleagues. Catherine Christian and her colleagues found that almost 80%, 78.3%, of Australian STEM early career researchers, so that's science, technology, engineering, medicine, and another M that I've forgotten. Don't know. Almost 80% of Australian STEM early career researchers within 10 years of gaining a PhD had considered a major career change in the past 5 years. Of these, over 75% cited lack of funding, 28.2%, and job insecurity, 48.9%, as motivations for considering leaving. Christian et al. 2021. This research was undertaken just before COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions on travel. COVID-19 has had a profound effect on Australian universities, including their research funding. Larkins and Marshman, 2021. While Australian universities were affected in different ways, most universities responded with immediate staff cuts. Those in insecure employment were disproportionately affected. Chija et al. 2020. I could find no literature that suggested that any of the issues discussed here will improve after the pandemic. 3.3.3 University Research Administration. While there are differences across the world, research administration is generally seen as the leadership, management, or support of research activities. Kerridge and Scott, 2018, page 2. This may include the management of research funding, ancillary functions such as ethics and higher degree administration, and the development of researchers. Where the focus is on the administration of funding, roles are often divided into pre-award, before the signing of the funding contract, and post-award, after the signing of the funding contract, with pre-award work, there we go, that's why we do this, being more developmental, and post-award work being more administrative. In Australian universities, it is generally seen as a role in and of itself, as opposed to being an additional role undertaken by researchers or other administrators. As with much university administration, it is a predominantly female occupation. By and large, research administrators are satisfied with their role overall and stay in a role even though they feel they have opportunities elsewhere. Kerridge and Scott, 2018. While research administration is the standard term in Australian universities, there are a variety of terms for these roles around the world, including research managers, research advisors, strategic research support, research development officers, income capture officer, or professionals at the interface of science. Kerridge, 2023, Acker, McGinn, and Campisi, 2019. Research administration has evolved in reaction to increasing funder requirements for accountability, management, and reporting. In general, policy follows process, with new requirements resulting in the creation of new internal university processes. Campbell, 2010, page 43. Research administrators sit between the interests of researchers and the interests of the research organisation, which can be a source of tension. N. Kaplan, 1959. As Daniel Campbell points out, research administrators are guardians of regulatory compliance, yet also recognise that such regulatory oversight can impede the research mission. Campbell, 2010, page 31. Barry Bozeman, Jan Yutri, and Jiwon Young described the practical outcome of this tension when they explored researchers' workarounds of non-compliance with research administration in Death by 1,000 10-minute tasks. Best title ever. Bozeman, Uti, and Jung, 2021. This tension was encapsulated by Melissa Anderson, Emily Roning, Raymond DeVries, and Brian Martinson when they sought to update the Meritonian norms of research. They described a norm-counter-norm pairing related to governance versus administration. Governance norm. Scientists are responsible for the direction and control of science through governance, self-regulation, and peer review. administration counternorm. Scientists rely on administrators to direct the scientific enterprise through management decisions. Anderson et al., 2010, page 379. They describe administration as decisions about the directions of science by those whose primary responsibilities are administrative, even if they were formerly working as scientists. Anderson et al., 2010, page 378. Since the very beginning, there have been research administrators who do and do not have a research background as part of the cadre of academically trained third space administrative staff. Berman and Pittman, 2010, N. Kaplan, 1959. University administration is often portrayed as a lesser alt-ac career for research-trained staff. My colleague Chin Koo challenges the either-or status of alt-ac discussions. Lesser alternative of alt-ac discussions within of alternative academic discussions with analysis of our own experience. So my colleague Chin Koo challenges the either-or status of alternative academic alt-ac discussions with an analysis of our own experiences of repeatedly moving into and out of research and research administration roles. Koo, 2014. Daniel Campbell describes research administrators as servant leaders who act as a resource for researchers. Campbell, 2010, page 42. Sandra Acker, Michelle McGinn, and Caitlin Campisi positioned research administration as a helping profession. Acker, McGinn, and Campisi, 2019. Their paper, although based on the Canadian experience, provides an excellent understanding of the work and attitudes of research administrators. Based on the Canadian of research administrators. Chin Koo, James Burford, and Jeanette Fife describe their approach to helping researchers through creating more caring and supportive research cultures across their university by creating a more fertile environment and being attentive to the well-being of the researcher as a whole person. Koo, Burford, and Fife, 2021, Koo, 2021. 3.3.4, well-being of staff. The culture of overwork at Australian universities can be inimical to the well-being of academics. Moreover, preferential weightings for some outputs and metrics over others constrain what work Australian academics feel is rewarded by their universities. This can be a source of stress, particularly for academics who favour different types of work. Kenny and Fluck, 2022B, 2022A. As Kylie Budge says, academic life can be a joyful and an immensely collaborative experience that nourishes the mind and soul, and also the reverse, lonely and tough. Budge, 2014, page 69. She discusses how valuable it has been for her to find pockets of agency that allow her to reconstruct her academic identity as a way to react against and cope with her experience of Australian universities. Budge, 2014. In response to issues of overwork and anxiety, particularly for research teams, Kylie Ball and David Crawford advocate a shift in academic leadership, cultures, training and practice towards a kinder, more people-focused approach. Ball and Crawford, 2020, page 2. When universities select common metrics for all staff, they flatten out the diversity within their staff cohort. Aminda O'Hare describes her transition from a career trajectory focused on research to one that focused on teaching. She found mid-career that she was passionate about her teaching while her university was not. O'Hare, 2021. Michelle Tichy, as a mother of two, provides advice on self-care practices to find the balance in the seeming chaos that comes with being a working mother in higher education. Tichy, 2021, page 118, Bertha Chin describes the complicated sense of dislocation that comes from returning to Asia after studying and working in a Western country. She describes coffee shops as third spaces that provided a place to collapse and embrace cultural and professional private boundaries. Chin 2021. Ali Black, Gail Crimmins, and Linda Henderson echo these statements when they discuss the connection between the personal and the professional. It is impossible to separate the personal from the professional, but we recognize that a pressure exists. We feel this pressure. Detaching from self is the professional thing to do, isn't it? Our workplace structures seem to communicate that such separation is appropriate. Black, Crimmins, and Henderson, 2019, page 532. Image 3.1, Pleasure Manifesto by Ali Black. This is a big page of text that has a heading right at the top right-hand corner that says, care. We value an ethic of caring, and relationships of trust matter to us. We coexist among our collective stories, our sharing of deep, real things. We refuse to live effectively thin lives. We resist the corporate rhetoric and counter, not everything that counts can be counted. We make time to acknowledge and reflect on the complexity and uncertainty and culture of academic life. We ask questions, good ones that give us purpose. We respond to shared longings to be differently in academia. We care about how ideas are generated, about creativity and rich, deep thinking. We choose deliberation over acceleration. We follow what feels good to us. We give time to conversation, to dialogue, to inquiry, to reading, to joy, to thinking, to creativity, to pleasure, to experiencing flow and timelessness. Ethics of care and self-care guide our decisions. Affliction, connection, and belonging sustain, nourish, and energize us. We value meaning, connectedness, presence. We choose to work together. We are better together. We value collective, caring, creative, intellectual, emotional, relational, ethical, and experimental inquiry and encounters. And that is all on a background of dark blue sky with a V of birds flying through it. Catherine Manathunga and Agnes Bosanquet write powerfully about the difficulty of changing a system from within. We experience this complexity within a system that we are simultaneously resisting. While this positioning can be uncomfortable, our reflections focus on the creative and collaborative possibilities of remaking academia to create conditions of hope for ourselves and others. Manathunga and Bosanquet, 2021, page 316. Jacqueline Lee and Shari Miller provide structures for understanding personal self-care and professional self-care together. Their structures for professional self-care include workload and time management, attention to the professional role, attention to reactions to work, professional social support, self-advocacy, professional development, and revitalization and generation of energy. Leanne Miller, 2013, page 100. As Narelle Lemon points out, family, dependence, community, workplaces, and/or culture, plus systems such as healthcare availability and their policies, processes, and structures are pivotal to self-care. Lemon, 2021, page 162. Narelle Lemon and Sharon McDonough, in an exploration of vulnerability and self-care, provide a series of provocations for academics, such as what does being an advocate for yourself and a self-care activist for the academy look like for you? McDonough and Lemon, 2021. This recognizes that while academics can take steps themselves, they can also take actions to improve their organizations. As Narelle Lemon writes in Self-Care is Worthy of Our Attention, we collectively highlight that the sector has a problem and that the more we feed the assumptions and expectations that make people feel like their well-being is something to put to the side, the longer we will have the problem. The sharing of narratives connected to explicit strategies is an active counteraction to the traditional narrative of overwork, poor health, stress, exhaustion, burnout, and no self-care. Lemon, 2021. Rachel Dwyer and Alison Black, in their introduction to Reimagining the Academy, Conceptual, Theoretical, Philosophical, and Methodological Sparks, ask how we can move the Academy closer to the one we want rather than the one we have. We know from personal experience how a sense of powerlessness and overwhelm can challenge our capacity to hope. This book has been written in the year of a global pandemic, a year of bushfires, loss of all kinds, intense emotions, and bone-deep exhaustion. And yet, we seek to remain hopeful and focused on enacting positive changes, on reimagining the academy we want for ourselves, our colleagues, and our students, and on building the kind of communities of which we wish to be a part. Dwyer and Black, 2021, page 2. As Narelle Lemon and Sharon McDonough ask, if not now, then when? They argue that just as COVID-19 lockdowns have forced change upon universities, it has given academics the opportunity to focus on what matters most for them. Lemon and McDonough, 2021, 3.4, in closing. This project responds to calls for further research into specific areas of crowdfunding, as expressed by Claire Ingram Bogaz in her review of crowdfunding across research fields. Other niche areas of crowdfunding, for instance, crowdfunding for science, are often mentioned in passing, but are poorly understood. Intrinsic rewards are likely to dominate, given the absence of any financial reward. However, these rewards may not operate in the same way as, for instance, in crowdfunding for philanthropy. Ingram Bogaz, 2019, page 38. In this review, I've provided an overview of the research to date on research crowdfunding. I've set the scene with opinion pieces that express both concern about and hope for research crowdfunding. I've shown how research crowdfunders provided a very different view of research crowdfunding based on their experience. The multi-project review sought to synthesize that experience to provide evidence-based guides for research crowdfunders. I provided separate spaces for the research and health research crowdfunding, international voices, and how university crowdfunding fits within civic crowdfunding. I've tried to place this research within an Australian landscape. To do this, I've provided an overview of research on the sociology of research as crowdfunding challenges some of the norms of research. I've examined large-scale reviews of several areas of university activity that have a bearing on crowdfunding, such as entrepreneurship, fundraising, and charitable giving, and social media use. I've provided a sense of how the debates around research funding have changed throughout the literature review, and finished with an examination of the literature on well-being, as this was an area of concern that emerged from my data. In addition to this, the published chapters, provide their own brief literature reviews, and I've tried not to duplicate those here. In particular, the chapter that provides a framework for ameliorating risk in university research crowdfunding provides a review of the literature around crowdfunding and the law in Australia and the perception of risk within a university setting. And I am not going to read all the references because that's another 1,000,000 pages. It is in fact another, I'm up to 50, it's another 26 pages. So I'm just going to scan through them and see if I can spot any mistakes. Of course, the one reference that someone is interested in. That's weird. The one reference that someone is interested in will be the reference that no, I can't because they're auto-generated. No. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. The one reference someone looks up will be the one that's wrong. Look, it all looks pretty damn good. URLs will be weird sometimes because they don't break. Neil Thompson stuff. Deb Verhoeven stuff. There we go. All right. All good. Save those changes and end stream. See you later.